So I'm happy to introduce Dr. Helen Dedes, whose presentation on fourth gender women and gender ambiguity will take place this evening. Dr. Dedes earned her doctorate at the California Institute of Integral Studies, and her doctorate is in philosophy and religion with a concentration in women's spirituality. Dr. Dedes has worked at William Patterson University since 2000 as an adjunct professor, first in the English department and then in women's and gender studies, where she has spent most of her teaching career at William Patterson. She's also taught at several other universities. The courses she teaches at William Patterson include life passages, the female experience, the life and writings of indigenous women, including Dedes, Native Americans and Aborigine women, goddess mythology is another course. She's taught race, gender, and social justice, women's changing roles, racism and sexism in the U.S. And she's done many presentations for the department and the Women's Center. And just a couple of them include a wonderful presentation on Medusa, another one on Pele, the Hawaiian goddess, and she's presented on several portions of her dissertation. And in my final thing that I wanted to say, I could say a lot more, but keeping it brief, she's the incoming chair of the New Jersey Consortium of Women's and Gender Studies. So I present Dr. Helen Dedes.
Thank you for the kind presentation, Arlene. You're always...
Yes, you should tell the title of your dissertation.
Okay. The title of my dissertation is Oracular Priestesses and Goddesses in Ancient Crete, Delphi, and Dodona. Just grab other here. I'm just gonna plug this in 1 second.
She teaches lots of interesting courses. Yes.
So first, I want to thank the Women's and Gender Studies Department for sponsoring this presentation this evening. Also, too, as I'm discussing Native tribes, I also want to recognize that we are on the land of the Lenape Indians and acknowledge that this is their land. The focus of this presentation this evening is on fourth gender women in Native tribes. I'm focusing on 4 types of fourth gender women, which include prophetesses, and you can see here in the stock image that this is a drawing of a Native prophetess. I'm focusing on female chiefs, I'm focusing on female warriors, and female hunters. And what I posit in this presentation, that this freedom for women to embrace in the westernized context non-traditional gender roles indicates egalitarian beliefs and practices in Native tribes. One other point that I posit in this paper is that when fourth gender women are discussed, the conversation often becomes about sexual orientation, and I'm not discrediting that half of these women were having intimate relationships with women that also existed, but what I'm also positing too is because they had this higher calling that oftentimes they transcended physical intimacy with a person. Whether it was a woman or a man, they abstained because it interfered with being connected to the divine for them. And this was also in my research. I found this similar with the oracular priestesses in Greece, that, that they often had to, at a certain time period, they had to lead chaste lives because it interfered the intimacy with them receiving messages and the nature of their calling. So, I, also want to posit that because when you read a lot of the scholarship, it goes into this marginalization of same-sex relationships. Not that it didn't exist, it existed, but there's also a lack of discussion about asexuality in fourth gender women, and I'm not talking about third gender men. So let me start off first with one word that's really problematic. When you read scholarship on fourth gender women, the word berdache is constantly used, and that's spelled spelled B-E-R-D-A-C-H-E. That's an Arabic term, and the late native scholar Paula Gunn Allen discusses why this word is problematic. So I'm just going to read you a quote from Gunn Allen. So she says the term berdache is applied, or rather misapplied, to both lesbians and gay males. It's Arabic in meaning. It refers to a sex slave boy or a male child used sexually by adult males. As such, it has no relevance to American Indian men or women. That's the end quote of berdache. So saying this too as an English major, and as English majors, we're constantly deconstructing the dialectic. And what you see pronounced throughout the scholarship is the constant use of this word berdache. And also too, from a scholarly perspective, it also became constantly included in the field of anthropology. Whereas constantly when they're referred berdache. The other problem with this word berdache, it implies abuse, it condones rape, the mistreatment of children. And what I ultimately propose in this presentation is, even though I'm going to be using the word because I'm quoting scholars that include their scholarship, is we have to stop this word berdache. It has to be eliminated. We have to use fourth gender women, third gender men. As I said before, we're not talking about third gender men, but it becomes really problematic. And again, that this term is inaccurate. And to give you also two anthropologists, Henry Angelino and Charles Shedd, in their article, A Note on Berdache, and just to give you, it's 1955, they say how the word connotes hermaphroditism. So again, you have this marginalization. You have this word created that also perpetuates the interlocking forms of oppression, because what happens is then the native communities that internalize this negatively, and it created this internalized racism, this internalized sexism, this internalized misogyny, this internalized heterosexism, homophobia, transphobia, and then it creates this class status level that this, because the power of this word being so negative. So here's another quote. In the literature, the term has been used in an exceedingly ambiguous way, being used as a synonym for homosexualism, hermaphroditism, transvestitism, and effeminism. And I say that this also suppresses the history, because then you don't get the real story. You get this quagmire of the colonizers' interpretation of these fourth gender women, which is then skewed. And the ethnographers and the anthropologists, they're mostly men, and this is the same problem as I discussed in archaeology. These are historically boys' clubs, right? And as if you watch the Burning Times, history is written by the winners, and the natives were not the winners in this. So we get this skewed perception of their narrative. So again, right, we see how patriarchy functions and heterosexism functions through this constant assignment to this word berdache when we talk about the fourth gender women. And what it does is it diminishes the true calling. So, this also gets into, you get, right, that this word comes with the invasions, right? That berdache was non-existent during the pre-invasions. This was not something that the indigenous referred to these fourth gender women. Another important historian who's written on natives is Will Roscoe, and he also discusses how this is connected to the field of anthropology. And again, as I said, that this creates a backlash in the native communities. First Nations scholar Evelyn Blackwood, she wrote her article, Sexuality and Gender in Certain Native American Tribes, the Case of Cross-Gender Females. She discusses how the Kootenai clan denied the existence of cross-gender female because of the colonizers, right? So this interlocking forms of oppression. And just to give you some context, I'll go to a map for a second where the Kootenai are. The Kootenai are modern-day Idaho, Montana. So I believe that this is Idaho. I think Montana's up there, and then British Columbia. So to give you, right, some context of then how the Kootenai internalized fourth gender roles negatively. which contradicts earlier evidence that claimed that such women as Flathead and Blackfoot lived among these women as fourth gender women. And when the anthropologists tried to interview the natives, they were unwilling to talk about it because the colonization had already occurred. So you see with the Kootenai, they rejected the validity of cross-gender people to invoke notions of proper sexuality that supported men's possession of sexual rights of women. And as I said, so you see in Native communities, you see that this repression continues to occur. So the colonization created this backlash, right? Because when we want to also talk about the accurate history, and what it also, this backlash also dismantled egalitarianism in the cultures. So, you know, one is connected to the other. So what it also posits too, would we be able in our culture and society to have gender neutral terminology because the natives did? And I'm going to talk about next in the Navajo, okay, to give you next someone here with the Navajo, that they, and here this is in the area of the Four Corners, here, there. When the Navajo refer to fourth gender women, the term is Nadlihi, right? So it's a gender neutral term. And it was referred to the third gender men and the fourth gender women. Female Nadlihi gained prestige in men's pursuits such as hunting and warfare. So what I say also too, that because it's a gender neutral term, it also supports the thriving of egalitarian practices in the Navajo people. And again, what really bothered me with the word berdache is the dialectic, how it becomes, this became the mainstream word, right? And it needs to be eradicated. So here, ethnologist Carolyn Eckel discusses the word Nadlihi as an alternate gender in her terms, coming to terms with Navajo Nadlihi. And she says the category alternate gender challenges both this word berdache and sexuality-based definitions of Nadlihi and others who may be similar by suggesting that more than two genders exist. Alternate gender theorists question the universality of a binary gender system, and with it, the formulation of a berdache as simply a mixer or crosser of man and woman. As a result, alternate gender proponents conceive of Nadlihi or others with possibly shared commonalities as not merely derivative of two genders, but as a gender in its own right. So again, we see the implications of a patriarchal heterosexist ideology with the colonization and the invasions, how it impacted the language of the native peoples. And here I'm talking again about the Navajo. Here's another quote. The idea of multiple genders, that is more than man and woman, also addresses the relevance of sexuality-based definitions. This one, scholar Thomas, he describes four Navajo genders: female-bodied woman, male-bodied woman, female-bodied Nadlihi, and male-bodied Nadlihi. By positing sexual practices as secondary expressions of the overall gender system, claiming that gender status occurs first and that sexual practices are simply questions of one's gender. This classification challenges those who would locate sexual practices in some fundamental, all-determining aspect of the individual's sexual orientation. So again, we see here the word Nadlihi is used, right? We don't have this ugly negative word berdache, right? Because this is what you do. You sign this saying, you know, well, she's fourth gender, she's lesbian. And in, you know, white capitalist patriarchy, we diminish if it's not heterosexual. So see, we put this negative word because these negative people, and it goes on to say, you know, like Freud, when he wrote his 3 essays on sexuality, he wrote how homosexuality was an aberration and a deviation. So you see, this all spirals into each other, this marginalization. So that's why also, too, that saying because it's heterosexist and homophobic to use the word berdache, we need to have it eliminated. Though I'm not in anthropology and I'm not an anthropologist, but this word really irked me with the research. Just, it was really Again, to give you some context with the Navajo and the Nadlihi, they have characteristics, right? So they're defined as having characteristics different from men and women, such as exceptional physical ability, specific attire, enhanced spirituality, a highly respected status, and association with wealth. So what I posit also too, that being Nadlihi is an advanced spiritual status of the soul. That's why you see, with some of them, they were psychic and warriors, that, often that this was displayed at a young age. So they knew that they're calling very young, and even from ages 10 to 12. Here's another quote. Once we view gender distinct from sex, several absolute distinctions begin to crumble. A female or a male is not bound by biology to several societal dictates and repression along gender lines can no longer find justification in an assumed state of nature and so forth. Additionally, if gender is a social construct, the assumed ambiguity of a binary gender system falls apart, and with the hierarchical dualism between man and woman, the dualistic order of modernity itself. So what she's saying is that how this social design of gender is an illusion, which, of course, in women's gender studies, we constantly debunk how gender, we constantly raise consciousness that, gender is a social construction. And again, you see how heterosexist patriarchy contributes to these negative stereotypes and backlash. So here's again Will Roscoe saying this. He's a really important scholar on Native culture, and he explains how the fourth gender tribal representation represented a diverse array of environmental adaptations, social organizations, family structures, languages, and religions. And he acknowledges they ranged from the egalitarian, because you get some of these, and often white male scholars would say they weren't egalitarian, the natives. They write their history, they try to take that away. So it's really important Roscoe as a scholar, he is a flawed scholar. You get into, and I'm not going to digress too much about too, because this is where with the natives, most of them are not particularly fond of non-natives writing about natives, because they often whitewash their history. But he does acknowledge egalitarianism, and that's really important. And here's a native scholar talked about her, Evelyn Blackwood, and she said that the egalitarian relations of the sexes were predicated on the cooperation of autonomous individuals who had control over their productive activities. People of both sexes could achieve positions of leadership through skill, wisdom, and spiritual power. So that's really important too, that, they were free and autonomous. Women, we have matriarchal cultures here. When people try to say, oh, matriarchal cultures don't exist, you do have tribes here before the invasions that were matriarchal. And I'll say this as a quick aside, I went to a powwow in June in New Brunswick, and the powwow was very patriarchal because of the internalized system of power. It was all men running it. You saw the absence of women. For me as a feminist, I found that troubling, because you didn't see the equal presence of women facilitating the event. It was very patriarchal. And if you read too an event, you hear this with the powwows today, that often, or at least on the East Coast, that's often how it is. So go to Will Roscoe. He claims that of the 400 native Indian tribes, 1/12 of all tribes had fourth gender women present. And here's the problem again with Roscoe scholarship. Yeah, yes, we're talking post-invasions, that those are the statistics. We don't know the pre-invasion statistics. So he's going right from post-invasion saying it's still a really small percentage of these women that undertook a man's lifestyle, becoming hunters, warriors, chiefs, prophetesses, and hence being associated, I'm going to use the word fourth gender, women. In terms of location, fourth gender women were most prominent in the Western territories. So here, British Columbia, you're talking where you see Blackfoot up there, that if you do a circle like that's where you mostly found fourth gender women. Okay, so I'm going to go here back with the Navajo. And read you an excerpt from A Creation Myth of the Navajo. Okay, again, the Navajo were egalitarian in their practices. For them, the number 4 was an important number. That creation occurred through the number 4. So what I liken this to in the Christian, if you were raised Christian, right, the number for Christianity is 7. So it's the equivalent of Christian 7. 7 levels of heaven, 7 days of the week, so on and so forth. But for them, their spiritual perfection number was 4. And that's what you, in here with the Navajo, you have the 4 corners, right, which is considered sacred space to them. So I'll read you. So I'm going to read you just a part of the Navajo creation myth, so you can compare and contrast from the biblical to the Christian, right? Because we all probably know the Adam and Eve myth. But in the Navajo, it starts off that there's 2 ears of corn, 1 yellow and 1 white are laid on the ground, and this is how the first man and woman are created. And what this also creates is an egalitarian view because of creation, because saying, of course, it's heterosexual, I'm going to get into this in a second, is that we don't have woman coming from the rib. They're man, woman, corn, earth. But the question I also pose, too, when we get into creation myths, we never read, usually, creation myths of 2 women as part of the creation myth, and we have scientific evidence of species that don't need men. We're talking animals. There's a type of lizard that creates on their own. They don't need a man. So we have evidence of not necessarily female species needing another man to procreate. And there's also, I don't want to digress too much, but one of my cohorts out in San Francisco, she wrote a book on saying how some of these women conceive children through parthenogenesis. So you get into the whole that saying that through divine transmission and the divine inseminated them and it wasn't a man and they became pregnant. So but also the reading this is to challenge creation myths we read, okay? That also, and in the Christian, it created this domination and subordination. See, you came from his rib, so you better listen to him. Okay, so I'll read you an excerpt from the Navajo. So 1 ear of corn was yellow, the other ear was white. Each ear was completely covered at the end with grains, just as sacred ears of corn are covered in our own world now. Proceeding silently, the gods laid 1 buckskin on the ground, careful that its head faced to the west. Upon this skin they placed 2 ears of corn, being just as careful that the tips of each pointed east. Over the corn, they spread the other buckskin, making sure that its head faced east. Under the white ear, they put the feather out. They put the feather of white in eagle. And under the yellow ear, they put the feather of a yellow eagle. Then they told the onlooking people to stand in the distance so that the wind could enter. The white wind blew between the buckskins, and while the wind thus blew, each of the holy people came and walked 4 times around the objects they placed so carefully on the ground. As they walked, the eagle feathers, whose tips protruded slightly from between the 2 buckskins, moved slightly. Just slightly, those who watched carefully were able to notice, and when the holy people had finished walking, they lifted the topmost buckskin, and lo, the ears of corn had disappeared, and in its place were man and woman. And again, I think it's a much nicer myth than the Adam and Eve myth. Even though I don't want to go into it, Lilith predates Adam, and in that, as the first wife, they're made from the dust of the earth. But we usually don't learn that myth in Christianity. We learn the Adam and Eve. So I'm going to go into the initiation process of the 4 gender women, and then I'm going to go into the 4 types of 4 gender women. So as I was saying before, the initiation process, an ethnographer, Ray Hauser, discusses the initiation process, and he says that there's 2 basic views of how these women became 4 gender women. And this is Hauser. The secular one holds that children did so when they demonstrated an interest in the occupations of the opposite sex, began to associate with them, and were accepted in new lives by their society. The religious view contends that adolescents were confirmed, this is him using the word berdashes, in a vision quest validation which permitted the society to recognize the transformation formally. And that's what's saying too, there has to be somebody either, the shaman or the fourth gender are getting some type of vision quest or extrasensory knowing that this is some type of cosmic calling. And also, so we have an economic, we have a social dimension here into this initiation process. We have a spiritual element into this initiation processes. And I said, they were usually inspired, these fourth gender women, by dreams or visions. They had shamanic powers. But again, I find the word shamanic problematic again because it has man in it. And I don't, I'm not into that inclusive, that man includes woman, in the language. So that's why I prefer to use the word prophetess. And these powers were sanctioned by tribal myths. So again, by having female prophetesses, we have this egalitarian system in place, even though I don't like to use the word system, there in the native cultures. So, okay, when you talk about the initiation process, there's also the issue of cross-dressing. Some of these women cross-dressed, some of them did not cross-dress. But this fourth gender, the signifier, was often the cross-dressing. And I'll talk about specifically out of the prophetess, the warrior, the chief, the hunter, who cross-dressed and who didn't in a couple minutes. Though this cross-dressing in the patriarchal, the colonizer, was again a way to diminish these women. You see something's not right with them, they're cross-dressing, they're not following our script, our code, there's something wrong with this whole fourth gender way of life. And they then define the European colonizers, the cross-dressing, as, they're deviants and they're aberrants. And again, I say that this perpetuates the heterosexist perspective, and also a homophobic one and a transphobic one as well. And saying to the old, as women, then don't we technically cross-dress every day that we wear pants? These are a couple other maps I put up. You see up there how is the Blackfeet, again, where the Navajo is. I will go back to the maps when I talk about some of these women to give you context of where they're located. Here's another image of the female prophetess. So that's what I'm going to go now. I'm going to go first into the prophetess. And I'm going to start with a quote from Paula Gunn Allen. As shamans, the women in many tribes function in all ways that male shamans are known to. They perform healings, hunting ceremonies, vision quests, and the guidance for them, acts of teleportation, weather direction, and more. In the various tribes, to each one's customs, the shaman also creates artifacts, clothing baskets, ornaments, objects to be in pouches or underskirts or sewed into bells. Here's another image of a female shaman. She was also known for officiating at burials, births, child naming, and welcoming into this world menstrual and pregnancy rituals and rites, psychic manipulation of animals, metamorphoses, or transformation. She does much of this through dancing and chanting. A large part of the method, symbols, significance, and effects of her shamanic efforts are recorded in the stories she tells. So here's some other images of what's supposed to be female shaman. So we also see with the female shaman, right, that a more, I don't know, I guess you could say a more charismatic type of female shaman was also a good storyteller. That she could tell, she could convey through storytelling, which is another important facet of Native communities. You see this when you go to New Mexico, that they have, the woman and all the little children on her lap, because the importance of storytelling. So again, this supports this egalitarian, and these are some other images of the female shaman. You can see here that the artist drew the cosmos and her, her heart chakra, her solar plexus chakra there. And here's again Jane Atkinson in her article, Shamanisms Today, that she describes the prophetess as initiated into the supernatural through altered states of consciousness. Altered states of consciousness usually, and this is me speaking, sorry, altered states of consciousness usually occur through the practice of meditation and deep breathing. It's the initiation, right? So in order to be an accelerated prophetess, you have to constantly go within, release the fears of the unknown, and the divine. And that's how the fourth gender woman evolved into the prophetess, because she's released fear and now she's able to fully connect to the divine. And again, this is Atkinson. One definition characterizes shamanism as an institutionalization of a transformation from the ordinary waking phase to a non-ordinary one, in which internally general information comes to dominate and override decision-making and orientation function of the waking phase. So this internal process, as I said before, of her connecting to the divine, allows her to heal and guide her people. And here's another image. So the transmission of the supernatural message is described as a chemically induced euphoria. And I'll say this is similar to my dissertation research at Delphi. In the underground chamber, when the oracular priestess goes below to the temple of Apollo, it's been confirmed that ethylene has risen to the surface, and she goes into this altered state and delivers her oracular messages. You see this even with the Taino Indians of the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico when they smoke the peace pipe, right? Because to go into altered states of consciousness. So the prophetess is a mediator between the visible world and the invisible world. Again, she does not fear death, and she's able to receive messages from this invisible dimension. And here's another quote: "The technique of communication used by the shamans as a creator of a state of interaction between this world and the other world is fundamentally an ecstatic role-taking technique." And that's how she accelerates into altered levels of consciousness. Often too, you see this around the people. People fear the prophetess because of her ability to predict the future. There was one, I'll go to a map a second here. There was a female prophetess, Congon of the Kootenai, and that's in what we would call Idaho, Montana. So, whoops, I went the wrong way. Let's see. I'm going to go back. So the Kootenai is Idaho, Montana, this area. So when I'm talking about this prophetess, this is the actual woman I'm talking about. It's that area. Ethnographer Claude Schaefer wrote about her in one of his articles. And this is a quote from him. "In her journey downstream, it will be noted that Quangon predicted the imminent end to the Indians and their land in a devastating plague, and through the agency of two supernaturals." So you see this with some of these women. Because they had the ability to see, they also saw the genocide of their people. So you can imagine the stress that you are powerless to change this. Why are you getting this information in if you can't do anything about it, right? How frustrating that must have felt for these women. And here's another quote by Ray Hauser. I talked about him before. "The shaman based his or her position in the tribe on fear. He or she possessed the power of life or death over others." I'm going to say I'm going to disagree with Hauser here, because Hauser's not psychic. So Hauser doesn't understand psychic ability. The shaman does not have power over the people. The shaman receives the message and delivers the message. The shaman, or the prophetess, does not determine who lives or who dies. It's only delivering the message of who gets to stay and who gets to go. And that, again, when you get into misinterpretation, this is an example. Here's a quote from anthropologist Jane Atkinson. She said, "Perhaps the most important development in the studies of shamanic ritual has been the increasing attention paid to the condition and dynamics of shamanic performance." And Schechner finds in shamanic ritual what he takes to be a goal in postmodern theater, namely an emphasis on performance, not as a finished product, but as a process of religious self-expression. So here, again, you see with the prophetess, it's considered religious expression. What happens when the colonizers come in? They eradicate that way of life, not just here, in the native land, but they do this in Europe, and because they say, well, that's not part of our religion. You have in Europe, Emperor Theodosius, he did the same thing. He closed down all the oracles because it undermined their ability to have power and control over these people. Another important aspect, and I'll move out of the map a second here, because I get to. Here I don't know if I had that image up for the female shaman. This was another interpretation. But also for these female prophetesses, performance through dance is in a supernatural state is a form of religious self-expression. And this can be similar to in native medicine. The grouse is also sacred spiral medicine. So when the grouse does its dance, right, you think of a spiral, right? So a spiral does this, right? And it goes in a circle, and then the circle thins out, and then eventually, boom, you've crossed into the invisible dimension, time, space, immemorial, and boom, you've gone into another level, another dimension, which is like the medicine of the grouse. This Kootenai fourth gender woman, Kwangan, she was known for disseminating the prophet dance doctrine. The prophet dance was the source of the ghost dance of 1890. And if we know from our native history, we know what happened to the ghost dance, right? It was taken away from them. They were told they were not allowed to perform this ghost dance because it was considered heretical, anti-God, because the colonizers' vision of God did not include nature. You did not commune with nature to be connected to the divine. We tell you what the pipeline is, and we get the answers, and you talk to us. So okay, Kwangan performed a dancing ritual named the ghost dance, and as I said, this was demonized by European settlers. This ghost dance again showed the egalitarian practices of the Kootenai people, but as I said before, with the invasions, the Kootenai then became brainwashed and pushed away their indigenous practices because of the colonizers. And here's another quote: "An old belief among the Northwest tribes in the impending destruction and renewal of the world when the dead would return in conjunction with the dance based on supposed imitation of the dance of the dead, and a conviction that intense preoccupation with the dance would hasten the happy day. From time to time, men died and returned to life with renewed assurances of the truth of the doctrine, and interval cataclysms of nature occurred which were taken as portents of the end. Each of these events led to the performance of the dance with new fervor, only to have it to fall in abeyance again when their expectations remained unfulfilled." So as I said, right, so here you have, they rejected this. And about Kwangan, right, so here's another quote. He notes that she preached, here I'll just put a picture. I don't have a picture of Kwangan, sorry. He notes that she preached imminent death and destruction of the coming of a golden age with an accompanying end to white hegemony on the middle Columbia reached the Mackenzie area. So again, here is the scholar, and he's skeptical about the female shaman, right? So he says that secondly, the promises of unlimited good things made to her, to the Indians of the middle Columbia represent, we believe, the second thoughts of a shrewd woman who learned the evil tidings are less safe than good among the strange people. And my analysis is that here the scholar Schaefer, he's devalued the role of the prophetess, the skeptical nonsense, to keep the strange people fearful of her people. So again, you see, right, that the patriarchal structure does not support the female prophetess. It wants to get rid of her. It wants to kill her. She's a problem. She's a threat. She disrupts their system of power. So that's why, too, that you use these negative terms. So Kwangan was not only a prophetess, she was a healer. And I want to say this, not all prophetesses are healers. They don't all have healing of the hands ability, but she was able, she had both abilities. Seeing into the future, as I said, it's two different gifts. So here's a quote. It was, she was known to heal her people from health ailments. So it was probably during these years that another largely masculine activity, shamanism, that she witnessed this. One known to us only through the accounts of modern Kootenai. Chief Paul claimed that she had treated and cured his father. Okay, so this is really interesting. Chief David of illness, and in addition had bestowed upon him her name of sitting in the water grizzly. It is possible that her ability to heal the sick arose from the supernatural power supposedly supposedly gained from her sexual transformation. And I said that her sexual transformation is probably not a literal one, but this is also because egalitarianism allows this fluidity. Okay, so next I'm going to go to the, here, you saw these images before. Am I going? Okay, I was going. Okay, so next I'm going to go to female chiefs. I'm not talking about Chief Pretty Nose, but I think too, as you start to see these images, I found them very comforting and healing to actually see these women. So I found this one of Chief Pretty Nose, and she, as it says, participated in the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876. The photograph was 1879. The female chiefs were also referred to as queens, and they were known to have existed in the Algonquian and Muscogee tribes from Massachusetts to Georgia. So I'm going to backpedal a second and go to a map so you can see here. Okay, so we have, maybe I'll go up here, it's easier. So Massachusetts to Georgia, because the Cherokee were originally from Georgia, and I talked about this in the Shapeshifter presentation earlier this year. So you have from here to, right, Massachusetts is about up here, right? So this is the area I'm talking about, is over here. The women chiefs, they were required to marry. So this gets interesting because the prophetesses were not required to marry. The female chief also inherited her position, but it was a hierarchy. She had to work her way up being a female chief first. She had to prove herself as a successful female warrior, and I will get to the female warrior in this presentation. There is a distinction of no supernatural vision initiating into her role and duty as sun squaw, right? So this was the term they used for the female chief. Although sun squaw has some similarities with the fourth gender woman, especially involvement in warfare, there is one important way in which they differ. Being a sun squaw, this is interesting, was not incompatible with heterosexual marriage. In fact, marriage was the primary way by Algonquian women became chiefs. There is also no evidence of sun squaw cross-dressing. So the women chiefs did not cross-dress. Algonquian women chiefs represent a mode of female autonomy linked to social stratification and inherited leadership. So I'm going to go back to the female chief pictures. So here I'll read you to about a female chief in the Kootenai that shows us how they thrived from an egalitarian perspective. One of the most prominent was the woman chief of the Crow tribe. My account is taken from another scholar who had known her for 10 years at Fort Union. He remarks that hers was the only instance of a woman attaining the rank of chief among any of the tribes of the Missouri. So to give you context, right, where they're talking about modern day Missouri. She was captured as a child by the Crow and was reared by and lived with the tribe, noticing a disposition in her to assume masculine habits and employment. Her captor encouraged her to learn to hunt, herd horses, and ride furiously. Under his tutelage, she soon became a fine shot with gun and bow and arrow, and spent most of her time killing deer, elk, buffalo, and grizzly, which she butchered and packed back to the camp. Her protector having been killed in battle, she then assumed charge of his lodge and family. Again, it's a hierarchy. To become chief, you have to prove yourself as a skilled hunter and warrior. The chief, the female chief, is known for wisdom and counsel in times of war and famine. And again, because I spoke about the prophetess so far, it's a different initiation process from the prophetess. That also, I found this problematic. According to who, they have masculine distinctions. The white male scholars that are recording this, is that really what the natives thought? We don't know because we don't have their recordings. We only have white male scholars telling us what they supposedly said. Some of these women wore men's clothing, others remained in female clothing. The Crow woman chief, it should be noted, was not a transvestite. Throughout her life, she wore woman's attire, except for hunting arms, equipment, and the man-type robe decorated with her war deeds. Taller and stronger than most women, Crow woman chief was tolerably good-looking, had been handsome, is now about 40 years of age. Her masculine pursuits proved unattractive to the Crow men, and she continued to lead a single life. However, she kept up in the style of man-in-chief and had her guns, bows, lances, and war horses, with the idea of turning her hides to some account by tanning and fitting them for trading purposes. She took herself a wife and later several more. So she did take a wife. We know this too, so I thought that was interesting. That's not her, but here's another picture of a woman chief. This is Pine Leaf. This is a drawing of her. Here's another one of a female chief, Kachkona Winema, who was also given the name Toby Riddle, as a woman chief. Next, I'm going to talk about the female warriors, and I'll leave this image up a couple minutes, because with the female warriors, I do have an image for one of them. So, but when I get to that, I'll make sure it's on the image so you can match it. So female warriors, again, as I said, it was a hierarchy of succession. In order to become a chief, you had to show yourself as a successful female warrior. When I talk about the female warriors, I'm starting off talking about the Cheyenne tribe. And then when I'll get to a map, I'll show you where the Cheyenne is on the map. So the word for the female warrior is Hedinamin, and they were, according to Will Roscoe, they were often great warriors who accompanied the warrior societies into times of war. Some of these even sat with the chief council and had an effective voice. Aside from the Cheyenne Hedinaman, there are no other confirmed instances of four-gender women roles among Plains tribes. Or again, as I said before, it's the Western territories that have most of these women. Yet the evidence of women's participation in both hunting and warfare is extensive. So let me go to a map so we can see where the Cheyenne are. Okay, so you see, right, so the Cheyenne are up over here. So here's the Four Corners. That's the area when we talk about with the female warrior. So let me... Okay, so here's female warriors. This is a picture of a female warrior. Okay, so the woman chief of the Crow tribe was first a warrior and then, as I said, became a chief. So here's a quote: "The woman's chief career as a warrior began unexpectedly. It happened that the Blackfoot, right, and so Blackfoot's up in the British Columbia area of Canada, attacked a few lodges of Crow near the trading posts in their country. That of the captive girl was among them. The survivors took refuge in the fort. The enemy wished to parley, and the only one who would venture forth from the fort was the girl. As she approached Blackfoot, several came forward to secure an easy prey. Instead, she shot one down with her gun and wounded two others, all without receiving a wound herself. Although pursued to the fort, she escaped unharmed. This daring act stamped her as a warrior." So we see how in our westernized culture and society, this is a non-traditional role because warfare is usually a man's domain. Also, so you have with this, right, this woman chief, she was always successful in battle, and that's why she was able to go from warrior to chief. So here's another quote, "A year later, she headed her first war excursion against Blackfoot. Fortune again favored her. She and her party stole 70 horses from the enemy camp, pursued and brought to the bay. The Crow raiders made off with most of the horses and 2 enemy scalps. One of the 2 Blackfoot was killed and scalped by the girl partisan, while she counted coup and seized a gun from the second. Other hazardous expeditions were undertaken and successfully carried out. In almost every battle, some gallant act distinguished this resolute woman. Old men began to believe she bore a charmed life. Her adopted people seemed to be proud of her and sang songs of her brave deeds. When council assembled, she took her place among the chiefs, ranking 3rd in a band of 160 lodges." So we see that her calling is also being able to defend her people in battle at a young age. This is one of her distinctions. So here I'll read you another quote about women warriors. "Women warriors appear to have been more numerous among the Blackfoot than some of the neighboring tribes. The most famous," and here let me get to her picture. So, whoops. Okay, this is who I'm talking about now. So we have a picture with the name. So now I'm talking about Running Eagle. So they wrote extensively on her. It was recorded, she was recorded in a novelistic vein. She was also known as Yellow Weasel Woman in her earlier years, and she came from a prominent Pygmy family of the Small Robes. At the age of 10 or 12, she began to exhibit masculine interests. Her father made her a good sinew back bow, and she began to join the boys in the games. Soon she began to care for the family's herd of horse and join hunting parties, helping to butcher and transport the meat to camp. So we see someone like her has to rely on her wits and instinct to save her family from death and danger. So she started off as a warrior as a teenager, and here's another quote. "Her career as a warrior began in her teens when a small Pygmy hunting party of which she and her father were members were attacked by the Assiniboine. During the fight, she saved her father's life. She evinced interest in raiding parties, encouraging the members on departure and welcoming them on return. She trailed a Pygmy war party against the Crow and finally admitted as a member, stole 11 horses, and killed a Crow warrior. Upon her victorious return, she was allowed to join in the singing victory song, and the scalp dance was performed in her honor." So this is the interesting, again, about when I was talking about whether they were intimate or not. She had stayed asexual for many years, and then she took relations with someone, and all her abilities left her, and it led to her demise and her destruction. So again, this connects with my theory, and I'm not saying that all of these 4 gender women, I mean, she wasn't asexual all the time, but there are stories when these women engaged in intimate relations, it also then their gifts or their talents or abilities seem to escape them. And that's what I'm saying also the point too, because, you know, when you connect with someone else on an intimate level, right, you connect, you absorb their energy. And if you take on that other person's energy, you can lose your sense of yourself. Speaking with here, and I have another image of, I don't have the exact story on her, but here's Lozen. She's a female warrior and a prophet. So you see combined, she had the ability to see, and she was also a female warrior. So again, the female warriors did not usually cross-dress into man's clothing. And again, First Nation scholar Evelyn Blackwood talks about this. Warrior women were not a counterpart of the male third gender, nor were they considered cross-gender. Ethnographers' attributions of masculinity to such behavior seem to be a product of Western beliefs about the rigid dichotomization of gender roles and the nature of suitable pursuits of women. That men simply accepted females as warriors and were not threatened by such behavior contradicts the notion that such women were even temporarily assuming the male role. The man's acceptance was based on recognition of the women warriors' capabilities as women. So again, we see how this is egalitarian, right? And that with the colonization, it becomes then devalued. And also then the native people, because of brainwashing and fear, do not want to continue this freedom for their people. Okay, so the last section that I'm going into is the female hunters. Here's another image of a woman warrior. I don't have a lot of images of female hunters. It was the most difficult to find. I found that surprising. I thought it was going to be easier. The area when logistically, in terms of the demographic that I'm talking about with female hunters, is the Rocky Mountain area and the Canadian Territory of British Columbia, which I showed before. So you had with female hunters, they were also oftentimes female warriors. And this area I'm talking about is the Casca. Again, it says the Rocky Mountains area, British Columbia. Parents sometimes raise the daughter to be like a man. So you hear this continually. Be like a man by who? By the scholars writing this or the natives, right? Question mark. Such a woman hunted, wore masculine attire, rejected the sexual advances of boys, and, quote, apparently entered homosexual relationships, end quote. That's not me. Here you have the French scholar Jean Goulet, his account of the Casca clothing, and this is from native scholar Evelyn Blackwood. So according to pre-contact of the Casca culture, males and females were identical. The clothing was identical. Once they began to walk, male and female children wore similar shirts of caribou skin, and summer adults wore tan skin breechcloth supported from an inner belt, a tailored coat or dress with the sleeves reaching to just below the elbow and girdled by a belt of tan skin or woven porcupine quills, along with trousers of the same material suspended at the hips from the inner belt and moccasins. In winter, for both men and women, the breechcloth became a length of plaited rabbit skin, while over the coat both sexes slipped a parka made of caribou skin, of sheep or skin tanned with the hair on. If men and women's leggings differed, it was only in length, those of the man reaching to the knee and the woman ending somewhat lower, while both sexes wore hats of beaver or rabbit skin with flaps extending below to the ear to tie under the chin. Casca clothing was not a significant marker of gender. To write of the traditional Casca person dressed in a masculine or feminine attire is meaningless and misleading. So again, you see with the colonization, then they deemed, bad, good, right, wrong with clothing. The native tribes did not have this issue with the clothing. They live and let live, be free. Be your authentic self, as we could say in a modern context. So here's another quote about the Casca. The activities of the girl raised as a boy also differed from those of other boys and girls. All Casca girls reached puberty having used a small rifle for a year or two and having already started running their mother's rabbit line. Girls and boys hunted the same small game. A girl who could shoot rabbits, chicken, and porcupine is flattered and may be called my little boy. The difference between the girl raised to be like a man and other girls not so raised is the former accompanied her father on long journeys away from home and engaged in big game hunting at a relatively younger age than other Casca women. So again, as I said, these women were known for their autonomous attitudes, and behaviors. They showed a greater readiness to live independently and as widows. They did not show eagerness to remarry, which is revealed by men. Indeed, a widow, perhaps with an aid of a daughter or sister, often becomes economically self-supporting, hunting moose and trapping, as well as tending to female-allocated duties, including dry meat, sewing, cooking, clothing. What we also see for the Casca woman is that she exhibited a greater level of independence than the men, rarely doing women's work, whilst women are in a position to learn many duties of the opposite sex and are better prepared to be self-sufficient. So what I think too in saying is I start to get wrapping up here. I mean, I just have a couple more quotes of this and then I'm going to get into conclusions. Is also what I think is really empowering and liberating about these fourth gender women is the autonomy and independence that they're able to have. They're able to be free. That is not, with the invasions, then, the women have to, continue the dogma that's been placed upon the European women. So what we also have here is the importance of dance and ceremony for these women, and also that these Casca women could transform themselves into a higher calling, especially the calling of being the fourth gender woman, that this was a rite, an initiation of passage that created a greater transformation. She shifts her state of consciousness and transforms, I'm saying oftentimes, either asexual or she was having intimate relations with women. This was part of the transformation. So here's another quote. Casca parents who raised a daughter to become a hunter intended her not to conceive later in life. So she had this calling as the hunter. They were very strict that she wasn't to procreate. They had certain rituals that to this end she wore a belt to which the dried ovaries of a bear were attached. And bear in native medicine also represents the art of introspection, right? Being introspective, going within. The intent of these practices was to avoid conception, not to prevent menstruation, nor to interfere with sexual intercourse with males. Parents could attach dry ovaries to the waist of the daughter, avoid conception without seeking to preclude the possibility that she would someday menstruate and engage in sexual intercourse, whether forced on her by a male, consented to, or by intromission. So again, we see these with these women also too, that the ritual of dance and ceremony was important to these fourth gender roles. And when the youngest daughter was about 5 years old, it was obvious that the mother was not going to produce a son. The parents performed a transformation ceremony. They tied the dried ovaries of a bear to a belt, which she always wore. That was believed to prevent menstruation, to protect her from pregnancy, and to give her luck on the hunt. If a boy made sexual advances to such a female, she reacted violently. Casca people explained her reaction. She knows that if he gets her, then her luck with the game will be broken. And that's what I'm saying. See, that's the point I'm saying, because it's something with this, I guess elevated calling, then connecting with someone else. It was really distracting to the level of consciousness they were existing on, that it broke the talents, the gifts, the abilities that some of these fourth gender women had. So also too, so we see that the interlocking forms of oppression affected the social conditioning of the native people with the invasions. So I'm gonna wrap this up into conclusion. What I posit again saying is that I'm saying that half of these women were asexual and then half, I don't want to say, I would say, let's say like, some of them were asexual, some of them had intimate relations with women, some of them had intimate relations with men. It's not as clear cut as it's just this. There's layers here with this. Wrapping up too, Paula Gunn Allen, who I discussed at the beginning of this presentation, expands on the stereotyping of fourth gender women. She's saying direct references to lesbians or lesbianism among American Indians are even more sparse than those about homosexual men usually called hermaphrodite, occurring almost outside the body of information about tribal life or included in ways that underscore white attitudes about tribes, Indians, and homosexuality. So what she's essentially saying, and again, we see this, is that there's always less information about women's relationships with women than men's relationships with men. And this also further makes the data problematic. So to sum this up, fourth gender women were prophetesses, chiefs, warriors, and hunters in egalitarian cultures and society. As I said, some of them were asexual, some of them had intimate relations with women, some of them with men. But unfortunately, heterosexist and patriarchal ideology has stereotyped these fourth gender women, and they've often been talked about very negatively, which is problematic. So what we need to do is rewrite the dialectic, get rid of this word dash, acknowledge the patriarchal history, the European page that's inserted into the native narrative, so we can try to retell the fourth gender women roles with accuracy and integrity. And again, that the prophetess, the hunter, the warrior, and the chief are all evidence of egalitarian views and practices. Thank you for your time and your patience and presentation.
Thank you. So, do you want to take some questions?
Okay, if there's questions,
Yeah.
sure.
Do you have any questions, Sean?
I do actually.
Oh,
So why don't you start?
Okay, so when discussing about women's gender, I feel like it's also important to know what the what men do as a gender, so that you know what the difference is. Because if I continue hearing that women do this and women do this and women do this, if I don't have the base of what men do, then it's it sort of means nothing. So I would like to ask if a man decides to take on more feminine roles, I don't know, agriculture, clothing, food, would they then have to basically be chaste or lose their ability, or did that not apply? And
No, do you have more to say?
And basically, it would be sort of sexist if the women would only lose their ability if they had intercourse while the men wouldn't.
Right, that's another paper, and because we were focusing on women, because usually that's about the third gender men. I think that's saying, if you're saying, they took on the roles of weaving, but my research didn't include, that would have to be then another paper combined. It's a good question you're asking.
Did you come across anything that said that, or did you just not find anything like your research?
When I was researching, I was focusing on the women. I did read some of about the third gender men, meaning the roles, with the weaving, you see, because weaving is traditionally considered a woman's role. So you see that, let's say, if a man at a young age, he had a distinction with weaving, then he was considered a third gender man because he was a weaver, because usually women were weavers. So I hadn't researched the intimacy activities of the third gender men, because just also to say too, that being in a woman's program, you get into the whole discussion when you discuss goddesses, that's saying, well, isn't it imbalance not to discuss gods? Well, we say as feminists, when you take the majority of mythology courses, you mostly read about gods, okay? And saying from having taught myth, okay? When you teach classical myth, it's all, they get a list of gods, and then they get a generalized goddess chapter. When you get to world myth, it's multicultural. You have more goddesses, but you still have gods. So the research was not focused. You're asking a good question.
Yeah, I know, but it's just, this was specialized to...
That's right, it's specialized to women, because also, historically it's been a paucity of women's representation in literature. It's gotten better in the last 25 years. I bring up this example, I'm sure Arlene could even predate this. When I was an English major as an undergrad, the requirement as an Old English major was all white male literature. There was one elective for women. If you wanted to take a class on natives, it became multicultural, saying, wait a second, this is still very boys club. Then in the 90s, I can speak where I went as an undergrad, it started to shift. So when we're also taking a focus, we're reclaiming the women's narrative, and we
and not, like, you don't need to have a women's discussion and then have to base it off the men, because, like, women can stand on its own as a discussion. You don't need.
Right. You're asking really good questions. They're just when I wrote this paper, there wasn't time and space for third gender men. That would be for somebody else than to weave it, or to write another paper weaving that.
Yeah.
But we just wanted to get the women on the map, so to speak. So that, I can tell you that with the roles, it was the same thing as a calling and a distinction at a young age, but I hadn't researched. They were also having, if you're saying relations with men, but there wasn't a stigma before the invasions. It's when the invasions come in saying, ooh, that's bad. Oh, the men are not supposed to be, they didn't have this before the invasions. And that's a point in the paper trying to convey, is how liberatory the indigenous people were. But because of capitalism and, patriarchy, those rights, they were stripped of those rights, and they were told that their ways were bad, wrong, evil, anti-God, so on and so forth.
I don't know if we can actually talk about, like, post-colonization and invasion, pre-colonization and invasion, because it's outside of our language and our reporting. But, like, would even weaving and doing such things be considered feminine to them? Or is it whoever takes it up, congratulations, and whoever took up hunting and stuff, go ahead. It's just whatever needed to be done got done by, and gender just wasn't even a consideration. Like, was it like that? That ego?
Yeah, that's saying that they didn't have those labels. It's the colonizers creating the labels, not the indigenous.
If I could just respond to that too. Actually, from my research, there were gender roles. However, there was no hierarchy of gender roles. So in other words, weaving was as valuable as hunting. Whereas with patriarchy, hunting is better, more important, than the weaving. So, from my research, there was gender roles, but and predominantly the weaving was done by the women. But again, it wasn't seen as
lesser. It was
exactly, which is really,
That's thanks for clarifying.
Important distinction.
That's what, that's saying. They had the roles, but it didn't have a hierarchical value, as Dr. Scala was, clarifying.
Helen, I don't know if you have more questions.
Sure.
So I'll take one, and then you can take one. Can you just review the 4 female genders, right? There's 4 females. So
Four gender roles.
Well, okay, so what are they?
Prophetess.
No, not only that. I mean, you used the word before.
4th gender woman.
Yeah, the 4th gender women, and you use the term began with an N. I wrote it down someplace. I didn't have the spelling of it correctly. If you're not talking about 4 roles, the role of the priestess, the role of the warrior, the hunter, etc., but the 4 actual genders of the female.
It's not 4 genders. I mean, it's woman, man, and then you have 3rd gender man, and you have 4th gender woman. So that's how when they assigned it.
Is that what they say in the research? I mean, I hadn't heard that.
Mm-hmm. That's how in the research.
Well, that's why. But when you word it like that, you put the male gender first and the female gender second. Like, why would you put an order in the genders? Because neither came first.
But 4 is a more sacred number for the indigenous.
Yeah, that is true.
It has more power and value to it. It's their, in the Christian, it's their 7 to say. Their 4 to them is the Christian 7.
The word was Nahihi?
Nadlihi from the Navajo.
How do you spell that?
Nadleehi.
And Lihi means 4th gender woman?
Yeah, it does, but it's also, it refers to both. Because in the tribal dialect, it doesn't have It's clean that way. And that's what it's trying to show with the Navajo between the creation myth. Yeah, it does apply to third and fourth gender, the not-leahy. See, but they have one term. Yeah, when you get into the English, because that's what I was saying also too, we don't have gender-neutral language. You know, we have he, she. The Navajo doesn't have that. They just have not-leahy for the word. And that was the point too, is trying to show when you get into language, it shifts.
But they have woman, man, and not-leahy.
Yes, it's woman, man, and not-leahy. So if you want to say the Navajo, yeah. Mm-hmm. So that three and four are together, because they don't have the division that we're with westernized, right? That we create this divisiveness, we create this separateness. They didn't have that separateness. That's why I shared the Navajo myth with the corn, because it's a much more relaxing myth to listen to, because here's the other corn. And I was also saying, if we go to the next level, why don't we have a creation myth with 2 women, 2 men, right? But we don't, in the Western, that's not possible, that's not feasible, because then that disrupts our system of power. And that's what I'm saying, we think future forward, but we also need myths. Okay, man, woman, it's still going into the heterosexist. How do we really know with creation, right? That this is all, when we start, if we put on our scholarly hats, how do we know, right? That we're raised Christian, this Bible says, that this is how the beginning of time occurred, according to who? And you see in the indigenous narrative that their cosmology is very different, and that's why it had to be eradicated by the colonizers, because then they wouldn't have the power and control that they had here, and created, the capitalism and the patriarchy that we still have today.
Your turn.
So you mentioned that when an individual did decide to take on the role of the other gender, although they may not other gender for us. Mm-hmm. You said that sometimes they would be on, when a prophetess would come up, they would basically be on a higher level of consciousness than everyone around. Then why wouldn't others try to strive for that other level of consciousness, and then all the women basically switch to male roles and all the males switch to female roles?
It's a really good question. I can give you an answer. The answer is because not everyone's at that level of evolution. That's saying when people that are, not everyone's at that level of advancement. Because also too, if you go to the prophetess, right, being a prophetess is not all sunshine and roses. I mean, it comes also with a big burden to it. People think, and saying even in the pop culture context, they think it's glamorous. They think there's something glamorous to it. But you're also, as I discussed, these women are getting visions of death, of genocide, destruction. Most people want that? They don't want to see that. Because the psychological toll that takes on the mind and the body can be disastrous. And you see how it led, even then, and then when they had intimate relations, it led to some of their demise. Because it's the same thing with the oracle at Delphi. When she was having intimate relations, it oftentimes interfered with her ability. So it's because when you're on the higher octave that way, and then, depending who you fuse with, and if you get very distracted by the person, you become immersed in that person's energy, that you can lose your sense of self and your gifts and your abilities.
Yeah, so there's a lot to lose. If you decide to go on that path and go strongly on that path, then
there's no going back. There's no going back, and your life does not have a simplicity that other people have. Your life is no longer simple.
It's so respected because it's so hard.
Right. It says, it takes a lot of, that somebody that embraces it is usually a very brave person. That's what they say. So it's not for the faint of heart, and also you don't have the simplicity that other people have in the day-to-day existence, because now you've crossed through the portal and there's no going back. That's usually how it works. But these are really good questions.
Yeah, and also connecting with your question, Shauna, and my understanding of what you're saying, what I heard you say, I think, is that for some of the Native American people, there was this inner calling to become fourth gender.
Yes.
But for some, from what you said, it was assignment.
Right, right.
The parents who had all girls would assign.
Right.
So, and that's interesting because being assigned is different than the inner calling.
Right.
But I could imagine that when one is assigned, that one could also develop a different consciousness too. I mean, I think it's very, very, very complex.
Yes.
You know, but you know, I did hear like kind of two pathways to the fourth gender.
That's
At
right.
least two pathways.
That is, yes, that's what's been documented. And that also too, saying with the oracular priestess, or even in ancient Greece, was two pathways. You're either, you know, they saw the distinction, or you were assigned, or you came from a prominent family, and you were then trained, or they noticed in the villages at a very young age. There's something different about that one. That one has an ability. The little child saying like, oh, so and so's house is going to go on fire Monday, and then the house, like, it was, you know, I'm just making a hypothetical example. It was something like this. It was observed that they saw.
If I can make one more comment before your next question. I also cannot help but think about trans people today. Okay? Now, I mean, with trans consciousness, at birth, we are assigned a sex.
Right.
And for trans people, somewhere along their journey, they find out that the sex that they have been assigned is not who they are.
Right.
You know, so I mean, I was thinking about that along with, and I guess like my understanding of trans today would be more like the Native people who are that inner calling. It would be more inner rather than that second assignment, like assigned a sex at birth, and then that second assignment when the parent decided, I will raise you as other than what you seem to be when you were born.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But I do have a question. For the fourth gender female, is it specifically to be transgendered, like male, but just not physically? Like they actually believe themselves to be like male, or are they just tomboyish? Or is it anywhere in between? Like, do they still consider themselves, like, or does that even not matter because they don't consider that?
Because they're transcended. They're transcended. It's a transcendent experience, and it's exalted state of consciousness, that calling, that it transcends. Yes, some of them, sure, some of them were with women, some of them were with men, but what's undocumented in the research, it's not acknowledged, is that some of them were neither. It was because the calling preceded, you know, it's like someone that, the very religious person takes a vow of celibacy because they feel calling to something else beyond the connection of intimacy to someone. And some of them, what I'm saying is that's how they were. It wasn't either that, you know, to be with a woman or be with a man. It was neither. It wasn't that the labeling is part of the colonization, tomboy. That's what I'm saying. It's really problematic when I read these quotes. Acting like a boy, is that really what the natives said? I don't know. I'm skeptical about that. That to me seems very whitewashed. It seems a very whitewashed interpretation of, you know, gender as a social construction. You know, I'm skeptical. And that's why, too, the indigenous are skeptical when white scholars want to write books, or, you know, to say this as a white scholar, you know, I'm coming from the intent of respect, you know, of the indigenous. That's my intention. But a lot of the main books you read, they're not respectful. You hear it even in the quotes of some of this, how it's not respectful, and it's problematic because it still has, and that's where too, with the berdache, that word is really problematic. It's the anthropology field that kept it alive. I'm not an anthropologist. Anthropology is not my field, but saying when you get into the root of the problem with that word, because what anthropology this is the version, and this is how it is, and we're in charge, and we have the power, and that's also what's problematic with some of this research. At least I found very problematic when I did this research.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
So it sounds as though you've actually interacted with some tribes and like had experiences with them. Did any of that actually help in this research, or like did you ever see a fourth gender woman?
In person,
Yeah.
no. Unfortunately, I'm not, and unfortunately, I've had more access to men than women. So having to spend the time, because again, you have more men at the front. When I go up to Seneca Nation, we've been upstate New York. You at the museum, you're usually interacting with men, not women. At the powwow, when I went to New Brunswick, it was men I had access to, not women, because they had, again, it was and as we said, what upset me with the powwow in New Brunswick, it was very patriarchal. And as I did research, I read, now because of the invasions, they've followed suit with the colonization. You saw all the MC and all the main people, they were men. It was, for me, I was put off by it, because you don't have the access. When I was asking, because another paper I wrote that presented the Dear Woman paper that I presented earlier this year, and I went up to some of the men, and I tried asking questions about Dear Woman. I don't know if I had said this to you, Arlene, but some of them looked at me like she sent me for them, like they were spooked. And then seeing also too, because as a white woman, they didn't want to talk. Because the legend with Dear Woman too is that she goes after men that lack integrity, and sometimes some of the things like what she does, like it does not end well for them. So when some of the guys, when I was some of the men, they looked at me like she sent me. Like they looked spooked, like they were just spooked out. They were no comment, like that. So, but I saw it even at the powwow. You don't have the access to the women, at least one. And then when I did the research, I read, because systemically the powwows are patriarchal. At least here around the East Coast they are. I've been up to New Mexico, the Taos, but it's also when you go to the res, they're not like, hey, great, come in and, if you get like intimately on one-on-one and you befriend, but collectively, they obviously, and with every right, view us with disdain and distrust because of the history. Am I just going to be another scholar that's going to come in and pretend to befriend them and then whitewash their narrative? They don't know. Why should they trust me? And that to me makes absolute sense. I understand that hesitancy. So it is really tricky. I came from the intent of trying to be respectful, as I said, and here putting into writing like a body, something here of trying to reclaim their history. Sure, is there flaws and inaccuracies, but I tried from the intent to move the conversation forward. That was the intent with this research.
I had another question, Helen. There was a question about your use of the term asexual for the fourth gender people who, might have had heterosexual relationships at one point, maybe homosexual relations at another point, and then you saw them as asexual.
Well, some of them.
Some of them at some point. But I'm wondering, are you using the concept of asexuality the same as celibacy? Because do they actually change their sexual orientation to asexual, or is it a celibate period when they, make a decision not to be sexually involved?
Celibately asexual? Like, yeah, it can shift.
Well, I think there's a difference. Now, I'm just saying, and it might even be a suggestion, like when as you continue with this, like to clarify that difference, you know what I mean? Because a priest take a celibacy vow doesn't mean they're not heterosexual, or that they might be homosexual. It's an individual concept, but they are not necessarily asexual. They're celibate. So I'm just wondering, maybe for further research.
a good point too, saying, that they can still be.
The difference between a decision to refrain from sexual behavior versus not having any, sexual desire. And, one of the areas where I need to do more research is on asexuality, and I don't understand asexuality. But again, asexuality is an orientation, whereas celibacy is not.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Thanks. That that it requires further clarity.
So on the topic of sexual orientation, we've gone over that gender is not really a concept for most tribes of the Native Americans until invasions. But what about sexual orientation? Like, did they think that the only real couples is somebody who can have a child, like the Vikings, or it's just be with who you want to be with? We just sort of,
It's the latter. There wasn't that.
Okay.
There wasn't these factions. The colonization occurred. They didn't have this. They were free. There wasn't. If a woman was with a woman, it wasn't. Oh, what are you doing? And also too, before the invasions, and rape was really low because egalitarianism usually is that you have low rape levels in egalitarian, and even in matriarchal cultures, and some of these tribes are matriarchal. The rape is almost non-existent, if very low, that we've seen. So this is because in patriarchy, what do? You kill off the indigenous men, you rape the women, so you create a system of power. That's one aspect of the patriarchy. You don't have that in egalitarianism in matriarchal cultures. It's practically non-existent globally.
And I think you are saying this. That would be in traditional Native American culture. Because focusing on Native Americans, today there is rape, and there is all kinds of domestic violence.
Yeah.
But again, Native life has been so interrupted traditionally. I didn't use the word kindly, interrupted by the Euro influence.
Yeah, like now there's alcoholism where that didn't even exist before.
That's right. Yeah. Do you have any other questions?
Now, I guess the only other one that I would have, you talk about the four corners. Now, the way I would understand that would be a Western perspective, because there weren't the states, and the states did not exist.
Right, but it's also a vortex. It represents a vortex.
Okay, all right.
And that goes back to how the four is sacred to them.
All right, okay. So I think, again...
like this, you got right around, like this area, it's a vortex.
Okay. So I think also, making that clear.
Okay.
Because again, it occurred to me, wait a minute, the states didn't exist, how could that be four corners? You know what I mean? So, but I understand we talk about vortex, and that's, another.
That area, and I've been in the area that's a high vortex level. When you go also to New Mexico, and you go up to the Taos, and you go up to Santa Fe, and you go up to Grand Canyon, on the Arizona side, there's something. You are in another force field up there. When you get up to even Sedona and that area, northern Arizona, there's something different there. It's different. There's an energy field there. So, that's what it seemed. But yeah, you get this area, it's a vortex.
But I still have a question though. So, did the Navajo believe that area was sacred, and then the West just sort of made a four corners on it, and it's just sort of a circumstance?
No, because it's a four corners. So because they likened it like a square, and four is sacred to them.
Yeah, but I'm saying when the Americans made their map, they made it into a four corner. I don't think that they did it while talking to the Native Americans and
Right,
getting
so-
the input. Like, so is that really just a circumstance?
Okay, so
or,
here's
how
like
that-
a map that doesn't have the traditional, right?
Yeah.
Here. So when you get into square, and then, but they also then, yeah, if you're saying what the area, but it's in that square.
So I guess you would say the states just happened to have that four square in that spot that was, in the general area that was already the vortex, the four. You know, and yeah, that's what I'm understanding you were saying, Helen.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
No, you asked really good questions.
Yeah, no, you asked excellent questions.
Yes.
Shauna. Very good.
You asked every questions about like you catch the small stuff, whatever. I'm like, oh yeah.
Thank you very much. Do you have any questions, Shauna?
More of just interested in all Native culture in general, but you have to go to specific tribe to tribe because like even then they're different. Like I've heard of tribes where there was the chieftain who was usually male. They controlled war and like things with other tribes, but then also in the tribe there was the female chief who basically got over agriculture and stuff. And if she didn't like what the war chief was saying, she's like, well, I'm not going to feed you, so what are you going to do now?
Yeah.
So
That was especially in the Iroquois, from my understanding.
Yeah, like
the roles of women in terms of how they exerted their power.
Yeah.
To say, we're in charge of the food. We don't want this war. No food. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you for being a captive audience. I appreciate it.
And thank you, Mike.
No problem.